Al Capone was not just a gangster. He was a businessman operating in one of the most profitable industries in American history. And that industry wasn't created by the free market. It was created by government policy. Prohibition didn't just ban alcohol. It created a market. It eliminated legal competition and handed the entire supply chain to those willing to take the risk. That market turned ordinary criminals into multi-millionaires, hollowed out entire cities, and proved a timeless economic rule. When laws ignore demand, someone will always supply it. When the 18th Amendment came into effect in 1920, banning the production, sale, and transportation of alcohol, the U.S. government framed it as a moral crusade. Alcohol, they said, was the source of crime, poverty, and domestic violence. Remove it, and society would heal itself. But that was a political promise, not an economic calculation. Demand for alcohol didn't disappear overnight. In many places, it actually increased. And when demand exists without legal supply, prices rise. That gap between law and reality is where Al Capone built his empire. Capone was born in 1999 in Brooklyn to a poor Italian immigrant family. By his early 20s, he was already involved in organized crime. But Prohibition-era Chicago wasn't just a city of opportunity. It was the epicenter of an underground economic revolution. Alcohol was no longer just a habit. It was the new oil. And Capone, with his organizational skill, connections, and ruthlessness, was perfectly positioned to dominate this industry. His operation wasn't a loose gang selling bottles in back alleys. It was a vertically integrated enterprise that any corporate strategist would admire. Capone controlled breweries, distilleries, import routes, and distribution networks. His products flowed into speakeasies disguised as soda shops, nightclubs, and back rooms. Each paid for uninterrupted supply. At its peak, his organization earned roughly $100 million a year in 1920s dollars, about $1.5 billion today. Capone didn't just make money, he laundered it. Profits from bootlegging were illegal, but Capone understood the importance of legitimacy. He invested in restaurants, nightclubs, and cash-heavy businesses. This both concealed the source of the money and gave his empire a public face. Bribes ensured protection from law enforcement. Politicians looked the other way. In a city where Prohibition had pushed half the economy underground, Capone wasn't seen as a criminal. He was an employer, a patron, and in some circles, a local hero. The key to his success wasn't violence, though he used it when necessary. It was risk management. Capone understood both the opportunity and the weakness of Prohibition. Alcohol was profitable because it was illegal. The day it became legal, margins would vanish, so he diversified. Gambling, prostitution, and other ventures entered the portfolio, but alcohol remained the cornerstone because its economics were unmatched. Before Prohibition, alcohol was a low-margin product, cheap and widely available. Once banned, every risk in the supply chain was priced in. Bribes to police, payments to drivers, middlemen fees. Prices skyrocketed, and consumers paid them. Demand was inelastic. Alcohol was embedded in social life, culture, and tradition. What Capone saw, lawmakers didn't. Prohibition didn't eliminate crime, it industrialized it. Capone's empire was built like a corporation. The only difference was the absence of legal boundaries. Vertical integration, market control, supply security, brand reputation, and an unbeatable distribution network. And all of it was extraordinarily profitable thanks to state-created artificial scarcity. But Prohibition created something else as well, a corruption economy. Money didn't flow only to gangsters. It flowed to police officers, judges, city officials, and even federal agents. Corruption wasn't a side effect, it was the system itself. When a legal system becomes dependent on illegal money, enforcement stops being about law and becomes about price. By the late 1920s, Capone's influence was so vast that Chicago politics and organized crime were nearly interchangeable. Rival gangs fought over distribution. The 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre became its symbol. Violence was the visible surface, but it wasn't the foundation. Finance was. And what made Capone untouchable for so long was his control over that financial machinery. But power built by policy is destroyed by policy. By the 1930s, public opinion shifted. The Great Depression changed everything. Legal alcohol tax revenue became more attractive than moral rhetoric. They couldn't convict Capone for alcohol, but they could for taxes. In 1931, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax evasion. His downfall wasn't a shootout, it was paperwork. In 1933, Prohibition was repealed. The market that made Capone a billionaire vanished overnight. Prices normalized. The black market turned into a taxable industry. And the lesson was clear. Prohibition failed not because criminals were strong, but because economics was stronger. The mechanism is the same today. Cannabis legalization, cryptocurrencies, sanctions, energy policy. When governments restrict supply, they don't destroy markets, they redirect them. Someone always fills the gap. Al Capone's story isn't about crime, it's about the intersection of law, money, and opportunity. Those who see these gaps early, legal or not, are the ones who win. The modern lesson is this: markets are never fully free. They are shaped by policy. Those who recognize artificial scarcity move ahead, but these markets are temporary. When laws change, the game ends. Capone rose because he understood the environment better than anyone. He fell because the environment changed. The cycle didn't end, only the products changed. If you don't understand history, history will crush you. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History holds the answers. I show you where to look.